Never before in history have ever two great trading entities ever engage in outright economic warfare like it's being engaged today. And that's why I say we're living in historic times. The elites have been concentrating wealth, have been gaming the system on their own workers, and have made a fortune.
In this episode, I'm sitting down with former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, host of War Room, and former executive chairman of Breitbart News.
It's not just tariffs, they're a tool. He's reorganizing the world's system of commerce and of trade. What President Trump looks at the United States is as a premium market. And just like you would pay to get a skybox at a sporting event, he's saying there's going to be a premium to get here. The next 100 days is going to be 3 times more intense, dramatic, and meaningful than the first 100 days. This summer, we're going to have a constitutional crisis.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Steve Bannon, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
No, I'm a huge fan of the show, and thank you so much for coming here in the War Room and having me on.
Let's start with this, okay? President Trump has instituted this regime of tariffs. You've described it as economic warfare, potentially putting Xi Jinping out of business. Before I get you to tell me about the 100 days, tell me what this whole thing is. Paint me a picture of what the big
picture. I think what he's doing is reorganizing. It's not just tariffs, they're a tool. He's reorganizing the world's system of commerce and of trade. And why is he doing this? Because for the last 40 or 50 years, the elites in the West, both in the city of London, which is their Wall Street, and our Wall Street, along with the global corporatists, have essentially worked with the Chinese Communist Party as a partner to essentially shift all high value-added manufacturing from England and the United States to mainland China. You've had a systematic deindustrialization of the West for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, done by the people and the leaders in the West, the elites, at the detriment of working class and middle class people. And that's what President Trump is trying to reorganize that global trading, commerce and trading systems around it. And here's where you're finding is that you're finding the biggest appetite for this to happen is in Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and Vietnam and the Philippines and India. Those are the countries right now, I can tell you, are stacked up over the Treasury Department, trying to finish the architecture, a memorandum of understanding of the deals that will kind of be this new trading relationship. And this is very different than TPP. People say, well, why did you just do TPP? TPP was a total disaster. So President Trump is doing that because the Chinese Communist Party has engaged in an economic war against the West for 20 or 30 years. This is what unrestricted warfare is about. And as the Epoch Times has shown, in every issue, the People's War that they declared, that Wang Xishan and Xi declared against the United States in May of 2019, after walking away from 2 years of tough negotiations of Li He, the vice premier, with Bob Lighthizer and Peter Navarro and President Trump, to walk away from that deal, shows you that they're not interested in actually, their only focus is a complete, totally decoupling, except from our capital and our technology.
I'd think of that time in 2018, 2019, where that deal was being negotiated as being the first time the Chinese Communist Party actually had to do something it didn't want to. What do you think? I mean, from the perspective of dealing with the West.
I think this is very important for the audience to understand. Let's go back to how this thing all began. At Tiananmen Square, when the Goddess of Liberty went up, and Deng Xiaoping and the faction there said, okay, we've had enough of this, right? We're going to drop the hammer. At that moment, which was 6 months before the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it all collapsed 50 years after essentially the U.S. and the Allies walked away from the Russian people and allowed the Bolsheviks to continue to run them, and essentially turned over Lao Beijing, the Chinese people, to the communists, because that was an action done by the U.S. State Department and other elites in the United States. And the collapse in 50 years, the whole aspect is to get the Chinese Communist Party re-engaged and economically engaged. They had Most Favored Nation and World Trade Organization by both Bush and Clinton junta in the 90s, along with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, all the elites, all the political class joined in. They completely gamed that system. The one thing they do is use negotiations and diplomacy is just stalling tactics or make the foreign devils feel better and let their media say about these big deals, like Obama's cyber deal, but we're never going to live up to it. Like Hong Kong, we're never going to live up to it, so as soon as we want to move, we move. Or like, remember, coming out of there was the skinny deal. Two things happened. The military games in Wuhan in, I don't know, August to July and August, where all of a sudden people started getting sick, right, with a virus. And then later the skinny deal. And think about that, the skinny deal that was done in 2020, they didn't live up to any provisions of that. We have negotiated and signed major agreements with these guys, over the last 25 years, including allowing them into the global trading system, the most favored nation in WTO, and they renege on everything. I mean, they don't even it's not even renege, they have no intention of fulfilling it. That's our cash and resources going to the Chinese Communist Party for slave labor products they made that they're skimming 80% off the top. The Chinese people, have they prospered? I kind of missed their prosperity part of this.
Well, a few did. A few prospered.
The CCP,
Yeah.
which most people in the West still don't understand. I told this to a very prominent person the other day. I said, of the let's say 2 billion people in China, there's under 100,000 communists. He goes, no, they're all communists. I go, oh no, they're most certainly not communists, right? They're Chinese, they're La Beijing, they happen to be living under a dictatorship, but there's about 92,000 and only a couple thousand matter. It's run by 5 factions. They're stealing or forcing our companies to give them $600 billion in intellectual property a year. The deficit on intellectual property, I think is $25 trillion. These are massive debt. They've sucked the lifeblood out of the industrial West as they've industrialized us. This is a deep, deep issue, this economic war. And finally, President Trump has said, I've had enough of getting ripped off, and we're going to engage in this thing.
Okay, so the economy, let's look at the Chinese economy. So this whole infrastructure development aspect of the economy is down massively. There's not much of a consumer economy to speak of.
Yes.
There's this theft economy, of course, and then there's the fourth part, of course, is the export. So what happens with these tariffs now, right? Because this is, do you agree that the export is the only piece of the economy they have left? I suppose the theft economy is still in play significantly, right? And we could discuss that. But
the pressure on the Chinese people, look, Besson said it yesterday. If you look in the Wall Street Journal had a quite brilliant piece this morning, a place that does not have a lot of brilliant pieces. They actually had a quite brilliant piece about the real pressures and fissures. And the BBC had a great piece the other day about the reality of Xi. Now, here's the dilemma, is that yes, they're already suffering and they're going to suffer more. But the Chinese Communist Party doesn't care. I mean, they've told them to gird for, and they're trying to go ultra-nationalist, to say the foreign devils are trying to destroy us like they've always tried to do. They're trying to make this an ultra-nationalist, and in some aspects even a racist thing, right? They're trying to do this. Mao said at the height of the nuclear of the West, of some of the tensions in the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things like that in the 60s, which, has the West, and we study it and we talk about it and we make movies about it. Mao said at the time, he said, hey, if the West, they hit us with nuclear weapons, he said, they had some calculation how many guys we lose. They said, I don't know, you lose 200 or 300 million. He goes, that's nothing, we'll recreate that. They didn't care. The Chinese Communist Party, and this is what the people that are in business with them will burn in the lowest pit of hell. Very simply. 450 to 500 million forced abortions. Miles Groh told me when he first met me, he said the forced abortions have been at least 500 million people, 80% of little girls. So the hungry ghost of the forced abortions. On top of that, they admit to murdering, starving, beating to death. From the forced collectivization to the Great Leap Forward, to the Cultural Revolution, to right now what's happening to the underground evangelical Christians, the underground Catholics, the Falun Gong, any religious or spiritual sect that you have, right? The Uyghurs, I don't care if you're Muslim or if you're right-wing traditional Catholic. They are fear, religion, and spirituality. The Chinese people, nothing else. They will put that down, torture it, do live organ harvesting. It's out in the open. These are not hidden things. You don't have to read. You don't have to have a security clearance to understand this. This is all known, and it's particularly known by the people that deal in information, which is not, what is Wall Street? The financial markets are nothing but information markets. They have perfect information. They know exactly what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing. The Chinese Communist Party is by far, with no second, the most murderous dictatorship in the history of mankind. The Bolsheviks and the Nazis are there, but they're Mao and these guys, they killed hundreds of millions of their own countrymen. It's not like they've been some invading power that has gone and killed. Oh, they have done that too in the killing fields and supporting, but they've principally taken it out on their own people. Why? They don't care. They don't care about the Chinese people. They look at the Chinese people as disposable as a cocktail napkin. And this is why, if you're in the Wall Street, if you're in the money class, or if you're in the global corporatist class, or you're in Silicon Valley in this apartheid state, and you're in business with them and made money off them, hey, you ought to have your nose rubbed in it, because trust me, when you leave this vale of tears and stand before your maker, you're going to be held accountable for that. You're going to be held accountable for the enslavement, murder, and degradation of the Chinese people.
And we're back with Steve Bannon, host of The War Room. I just want to touch on this the External Revenue Service, okay?
Created in this very room.
Well, I watched that episode, actually.
With John Gardner.
John, absolutely.
A guy and, for small manufacturer in Laguna Beach, California.
That's right, that's right. So can that happen? I mean, it's happening at some level, but there seems to be a pretty big cost. Like there's, GDP numbers, a lot of people are reporting seem to be down. Some people are saying that's a statistical artifact. I don't know. But is there, even if it's a statistical recession,
the way to look at, so the GDP number came out the other day. If you look right below that number, there's, it's really 3% growth. There's investment growing, et cetera. And that's all from really Biden's. I mean, President Trump, even the Liberation Day happened on April 2nd. We're not even 29 days into this, so it wouldn't have had that big of impact into the quarterly number. I think the way to look at this, the way President Trump does, the U.S. is the premier consumer market in the world, and heretofore we just let people have free access to it. In fact, it's not just tariffs in the number, it's non-tariff barriers. Mm-hmm. It's currency manipulation, it's counterfeiting. I mean, these are things that the Chinese Communist Party, beyond masters, currency manipulation, counterfeiting, and all the types of duties.
And transshipment. When I saw those tariffs first, right, that was what struck me, that the highest ones were all around the transshipment, big transshipment hubs.
Yes, exactly.
The CCP, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the what President Trump looks at the United States is as a premium market. And just like you would pay to get a skybox at a sporting event or pay a first row ticket for a concert, he's saying there's going to be a premium to get here. Right? And that's why reciprocity, he takes in the non-tariff barriers into that. He's saying, by the way, but you can get out of that. The way you can get out of that is that if you bring your manufacturing back to the United States and create high value-added manufacturing jobs with massive capital investment, guess what? You can get out of the tariffs. Now, if you're going to continue on, there is going to be a tariff structure. Right now, even at the minimum, the average tariffs in the United States have been 2%. Right now, the basic lowest thing you get in Trump in the Trump is 10, which is a 500%. I mean, it's amazing, and a lot of these are going to be 20, 25%. So there will be the revenues generated from that will be pretty extraordinary. I happen to think that most people, most companies, etc., are going to opt to, which President Trump wants, investment here in the United States that creates returns us to a manufacturing superpower. And because of that, we get domestic tax revenues from corporations and from people making better wages and more people making good wages.
I mean, the gambit basically is that there's nowhere else to go. So you have to come here, and either you do it in here or you pay the tariff.
It's the greatest consumer market in the world. So you're going to have to, like President Trump says, he's holding the cards. Now, will some things kind of slip out, et cetera, but look, this guy's a master negotiator. If you think of geopolitically or geostrategically and geoeconomics, and people, I was doing a town hall last night on News Nation, the guys are screaming, well, when's it going to, I said, guys, this has been 50 years of rot. 50 years of selling out your country, 50 years of selling out your countrymen and selling out the workers and the middle class of this nation. The guy's 100 days into it, he's only 28 days into from Liberation Day. It's gonna take a while. It's not gonna take 10 years, but this thing, and directionally, I know Trump pretty well. He ain't backing off this. Will there be things on the side? And one of the things he has to do, remember, one of the reasons I love the newspaper so much, Epoch Times, which by the way, I want to say again, is by far, there's not even a second, the best broadsheet in the country. I can say that because I am a news consumer. First, I get every printed paper you get here in Washington, D.C.
I see that.
No, but you're an extraordinary, it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary paper. It's put together. The writing's amazing. The investigative reporting's amazing. Then NTD, what you do on the TV is also extraordinary. But for a media company that's really at its very early years of growth, to outshine the Wall Street Journal, to outshine the New York Times, things have been doing this for over 100 years. These things trade at 10, 20, 30, 40 billion dollars and have huge, massive staffs, but also have gone out of the way to promote, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars to promote their paywall and behind it. And you look at Epoch Times and it's not a huge effort to do it. It's basically people are attracted because of the content in a free market. Plus the reporting's just extraordinary. If you look at the serious stories, and not just that, it does what a newspaper is supposed to do. It not only informs you of domestic politics and what's going on, it's one of the most serious papers in the world in allowing any individual to understand the world, right? That's been the power of really the New York Times for the elite or for the progressives, and really the Wall Street Journal heretofore for the business community. It gives those people an insight to the entire world. The Epoch Times does that, and it's pretty extraordinary. You can read, if you read that paper, if you go online and read it every day, or read the printed edition, it's extraordinary. But I think you look at what's going on in those editions, and you see what's happening with this fight. President Trump, this is part of his core being. This is central to not just his political DNA. This is central to what I call his public persona DNA. He has talked about trade. He's talked about trade deficits, first with Japan and then with China, for 40 years. And I tell people, you didn't know this was coming, and don't think he's going to wave off. He said last night on News Nation, the first time I've heard him say it, he says, look, part of my negotiating thing is to think things through and have flexibility, to be able to, call an audible and do. There's going to be flexibility and audibles called between the United States and China as this thing gets worked out. But never before in history have ever two great trading entities ever engaged in outright economic warfare like it's being engaged today. And that's why I say we're living in historic times. Now I realize that's a curse to our Chinese audience, but that's the reality of what we're living through today.
Well, okay, so maybe in a nutshell, characterize for me the first 100 days of, I guess it's 28 days, as you said earlier, from Liberation Day. But obviously this was in the works from the moment that they got out of the blocks. And so...
Well, this has been 4 years, and this is part of Project Print 2025 and Center for Renewing America. The 5 or 6 think tanks have been working this 4 years.
Yeah.
This is why you had the Days of Thunder. Look, the first 100 days just one word, it's a revolution. President Trump, in every vertical you're talking about, and particularly the main thing, which is the Chinese Communist Party, geopolitically, geostrategically, and geoeconomically, it's been magnificent. But that's one of 50 of major things that are going. I mean, he has done, think about it, on the border. We were told by Langford, and Republicans, this is not Democrats trying to sell you a bill of goods, this is Republicans trying to sell you a bill of goods, that we had to have this huge bill, put up tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, and people forget in the bill that none of the restrictions came on until you hit 2 million a year illegal aliens coming across the border. The bill Langford put up that President Trump was criticized, the worm, oh, you're a bunch of racists and nativists, had 2 million a year before penalties and sanctions and restrictions started coming. Trump closed the border by basically doing away with the architecture of executive orders of Biden to actually allow this invasion to happen, and having Customs and Border enforce the border and sending some troops down there. In 60 days, The border's closed. Now we're going to build the wall and do everything we have there. The border is closed. Okay, so the number one thing he ran on has been done. Have we deported 10 million? No. That's kind of step two. That's being worked through. He's trying to deport as many as possible. But they go, oh, you haven't done deportation? I say, screw you. You just gave me a solution a year ago that was going to have 2 million a year coming here every year before you even did anything about it. So I don't want to hear your crap, because this guy in 60 days closed it, as he said he was going to do. People that are watching this show should go back and remember every lie that you were told about the border, right? All the misinformation you were told about the border, everything you were told to believe about the border were 100% lies, okay? Trump came in and did it in 60 days. And people in South Texas, people in the Rio Grande Valley, in Southern Arizona, you can see it's a totally new feel. It's not an invasion going on anymore. Do we have problems on the border? Certainly. Do we have a massive problem now how you deport these? Of course we do. That's all being worked through. The other thing is inflation. They said, oh, you know, inflation is at 2.3%. Interest rates are down. Everything's down, cheaper. Energy, his thing. So the two big things he said are all happening at the same time. And there's another 50 things on top of that, or 100 things. It's been, 137 executive orders. It's the urgency, the rapidity, and the scale of what he's done. But the most important thing of all of that, of this is breathtaking thing, is the fact you see this guy every day. It's the same guy. It's Donald Trump. It's Trump having in the Oval Office where there's bilats, and they used to all behind closed doors. Remember in the Iraq and Afghanistan war of Bush? You never knew about this. It'd be meetings at the White House. These guys come to the White House and Trump sets them up in front of the fireplace. The cameras come on and he disintermediates the mainstream media. No longer do they have the microphone. He just says, cut the cameras on, here, blah, blah, blah. He starts talking, he goes on one of his riffs, and then he throws up the questions. And now he's opened up to Epoch Times and the War Room and to the ecosystem on the right. You get better questions. Every day he's showing you what government's about. This is like FDR doing a fireside chat every day and having the whole nation in there. This has never been done in human history. No advanced industrial power has ever governed purely as a populace, purely, hey, come on in, ask me some questions, right? What do you have to say? He doesn't shy away from questions. It's extraordinary in the level of energy and intensity. And he's the same guy every day. It's Trump sitting there and he's going to throw out some crazy stuff because Donald Trump, right? Half of it's trolling people, right? The other half he's throwing out ideas. It's extraordinary. It's never been done. It'll never be done again. That's why we're living in a complete historic moment right now.
Steve Bannon, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Love you guys, and come back.
Thank you all for joining Steve Bannon and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.